When Love Stopped Breathing. Previous episodes are available on playlist, a link is given in the video description. Episode 3. Chapter 23. Lena had a hard time getting the tablets out of the bag that Lola had been holding open for her. Lena looked thankful as Lola helped her drink from a glass of water to take her medications. After a while, the pain becomes less strong. Lola had been caressing Lena's back the whole time with a worried look on her face. The medications made Lena numb, which was a fake relief. She was still trying to get used to it. But the fortunate thing about her small incident at that point made what Lola saw earlier a different story. Lola was fascinated by Kellen's reported deep interest in Lena, but her health was more important to her. So, when Lola eventually started the questioning, it didn't sound like an interrogation. "Thank goodness. Did the crazy person touch you?" But it was still just as embarrassing. Lena cleared her throat. "Nope." Lola looked like she was thinking. "Did you both then touch each other inappropriately?" "No way, Lola," Lena said, breathing heavily. "We were fighting about how he was always breathing down Damien's neck. At least it wasn't a lie. And then, like the crazy man he is, he stalked closer to threaten me. Thank God for the person who made threats if what I saw was a bloody threat," Lola said, throwing her hands up in frustration. "For heaven's sake, Lena, it's clear that he was trying to cast a spell on you and cheat on his fiancée with you." Lola angrily put a hand on Lena's shoulder and said, "That maniac is really a filthy thing. His interest in you is very interesting, but he's bloody engaged to that model, and whatever he's trying to do now is so wrong." Lola did an excellent job of explaining what was going on here. Lena was quite relieved. Lena said, "I agree." Kellen was completely overwhelmed by all that was wrong. What if he viewed the photo immediately? Would she be alive to see that day? In any case, she didn't care anymore. So much had happened in the last several months, so much had changed, and so much had been lost. Nothing on earth or in heaven can bring back the past. When things became too hard, and the tension seemed like it was going to kill her, with painful memories closing in on her from all sides, her safe place always rescued her. Gwen's orphanage visits on Sundays were regular, but lately, these surprise visits were becoming frequent, too. Lena sat on a seat in the orphanage's field that night. She was bouncing Dave on her lap. She smiled as the youngster laughed and cried with joy. Gwen sighed and said, "I'm sorry, Lena," looking at her with sympathy. "I can't give Dave to you, no matter how much I want to." Lena was right, her application to adopt was probably turned down. This time, the lethal sickness that was ticking like a time bomb in her head triumphed. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she was able to grin through them. "I get it, Mom." She got it. She did, that's for sure. Dave deserved the best. All of these kids deserved the best. They have the right to a safe existence and a steady place to grow up. Lena wouldn't be able to provide any of them at the moment. She wasn't even sure if she would be alive next year or 6 feet under the ground, literally. "But don't worry, I can visit the kids and my Dave as much as I want, right?" Lena said, wiping away her tears and running her fingers over Dave's adorable tiny hair on top of his head. Mom nodded and smiled, too. "Yes, You can." A bunch of youngsters raced by them, chasing a small girl with golden locks that were flying all over the place. Dave turned his head around and looked at them with his mouth open and drool pouring down his chest. The youngster seemed quite awake. He even waved his fists about and yelled a little as if to protest the terrible noise pollution surrounding him. "Are you going to come to our charity brunch next month?" Mother inquired after a while of quiet. "I definitely will," Lena said with a big smile on her face, taking a quick breath. It was clear that she was really excited. "Don't miss the chance to see these cute little kids having fun, showing off their skills to the guests, and probably meeting people who will adopt them soon and give them a family and a loving home." The orphanage held these charity brunches twice a year to get individuals from all walks of life to help make the lives of these kids better in some manner. Instead of merely being a guest, Lena had opted to help with the planning. She didn't have a lot of money, but this way, she could still be a part of the brunch. Kellen let out a sigh as he looked out the window of his living room. His duplex apartment offered a lovely view, but it didn't help his mood at all at that moment. Kellen's heart was pounding in his throat after the nearly kiss this morning, and he rushed out of the store. He had kissed Lena many times before, and the memories of those kisses had never left him. But the instant their lips touched, he thought he felt something break inside his chest. He remembered how her lips tasted, how she moaned, and how her eyes looked as if they were making love. He had a strong want to turn around, go back to her office, and take her away to a remote area where they could relive their old memories and talk about the passion they had. It just couldn't be. He contacted Selene instead and met her at a restaurant. When she kissed him, he didn't stop her but instead kissed her back. But unhappily, it still didn't seem right, like all the previous times Selene had kissed him. It tasted flat and didn't have any of the intensity that normally came over him when he kissed Lena. Selene appeared happy, too, and she definitely didn't agree with Kellen about how close they were. It simply made Kellen even angrier. It all felt off. "You met Lena?" It didn't seem like a question. Celeste Hart spoke it more like she was sitting on the couch across from Kellen. Kellen was shocked as he stared at his mother. "How did she find out about it?" "Selene told me," Celeste said before Kellen could even ask. Kellen grumbled and then stopped talking. He had to tell Selene to stop what she was doing. He didn't want a fiancé who liked to move news around for no reason and in a way that annoyed him. Kellen softly murmured, "She's my new client's business partner," and then he turned to stare out the window again. "You need to get over that dangerous woman, son," Celeste said firmly, yet her eyes were gentle on her son, who was now looking at her in disbelief. "You came to my engagement party with Selene, and you still say that I haven't moved on from Lena?" Kellen shouted. He let out a deep breath, and his frown disappeared as he saw Celeste quiver. He recognized that he had grown quite defensive, and his actions were giving away things he hated about himself. He despised Lena for shattering his heart, but he also couldn't stop thinking about her every second. Celeste put a hand on Kellen's to calm him. "I just want my only son to be happy." He hadn't told his mother that he was engaged to Selene more as a business deal than as a relationship based on love or other feelings. But it looked like Celeste was starting to see through him, even if he had his mouth shut. Celeste had never hated Lena before, but now that Lena's true face had been revealed, Celeste hated her with all her heart. It was clear that Celeste was now very determined to keep her only kid away from people like Lena, following a very instructive talk with Selene. "I've moved on, Mom. I really have." It seemed like he was trying to convince himself more than his mother. "She'll get the divorce papers in a few days. Our marriage will finally be over." His voice broke without him meaning to. He couldn't help but give up that tiny bit. Lena fell back onto the soft cushion and stared at the four-line that was connected to the back of her hand. She didn't think it would be as exciting as she had thought chemotherapy would be. She was transported to the infusion suite and given pre-medications once she got to the hospital. When she asked the nurse, a middle-aged lady with a perpetual smile on her face, what it was, the nurse told her it was just anti-nausea medication. The nurse put an 4 in her arm and then departed. She came back every 10 minutes to check on her. Lena looked to her right as she heard a lengthy snore. She grinned when she saw it. Damien had offered to be her guardian angel while she took all of her medicines for an hour. He looked fatigued after a long day at work, so Lena told him to lie down on the couch and converse from there. That way, he may also catch some sleep. Damien's heavy eyelids lost the struggle to stay open immediately in front of Lena's gaze. Since then, his slurred speech has turned into quiet snores. Lena was happy that he was finally getting some sleep and not fretting about her like a crazy mother hen. But after a while, it was tiresome to see Damien sleeping with the 4 in her hand. There wasn't much furniture in the room either, and branches of trees with flowering leaves covered the view from the open window to her left. Lena was about to put on the TV and watch anything at a low volume when the door to her room creaked open a bit, which scared her. She believed the nurse had come back, but it was only a little girl's head, maybe 4 or 5 years old, that peeked in. Lena was glared at by 2 round eyes that seemed like they were up to no good. The girl's little hands kept the door open. The girl's little hospital gown and scarf over her head showed that she had already had a lot of chemotherapy sessions at such a young age. Lena remembered seeing other kids who were getting cancer treatment walking around or sitting in the corridor. There were people of all ages fighting in the oncology section. Lena smiled a little, and the little girl at the door smiled back after a second. Lena waved her free hand to tell the girl to come in. The tiny girl walked right in, and the door closed behind her. The girl said, "My name is Dalla." "What is your name?" and put her hands on the side of Lena's bed. Lena couldn't help but laugh. It seemed like this tiny kid spoke R instead of L, and Lena had found a new companion to hang out with for the next hour. "Lena, which room are you?" But Damien snored loudly again, making a sound like a lion's roar. Of course, the other individuals in the room who were awake laughed out loud. And since then, a sweet new friendship has grown. Dana, or Dalla as she liked to be called, was well knowledgeable about all the negative effects of chemotherapy. "When it comes out again, my hail will be blue." Lena had to bite her lip to keep from laughing when she saw Dana's very serious look. "How can you be so sure? Every morning, they give me these blue pills. Now my nails are a little blue because of them, and my hair will be too." Kids' thinking is strange for practically everything, and that's because they are so innocent. Lena smiled and said, "I guess my hair will be blue too in the future." She helped Dana onto the bed and snuggled next to her. "But it's not a bad thing," Dana looked like she had hope. "Why don't you just stay at my place again, Lena?" Damien's face showed anxiety and dread, and creases appeared on his forehead. "The doctor clearly said that the side effects of chemotherapy will show up. What if you get sick? You won't even stay at Lola's house or let one of us stay at yours." Lena moved up to smooth out the creases on his brow. "I still have some time to enjoy my freedom before the side effects get bad. The doctor said the first cycle of chemos is lighter, remember? Also, she didn't want to be a bigger burden on Damien and Lola. They were already doing so much for her, and she didn't think she would ever be able to pay them back." Damien grumbled back and then let out a long breath. He put his hand on her cheek and kissed her head quickly. "Keep the phone close by, and my number is on your speed dial, right? And don't forget to eat only foods that are easy to digest. That means no fast food, spice, or?" Lena nodded and rolled her eyes. Yes, Captain, I get it all. Now, don't have a heart attack." Damien grinned, and his eyes crinkled at the corners with joy. He told her firmly, "You feel a little sick, and you'll call me," and then he hugged her tightly. "And don't forget to call Lola when you get home. She's mad that you asked me to go with you instead of her." "I will," Lena said with a smile as she watched Damien get into his car. Lena walked inside the building a little slower than usual since the medicines she had just taken an hour before made her feel a little sleepy without knowing that a pair of hostile eyes were watching from a distance. She didn't even notice the footsteps behind her. She didn't know someone was behind her until she got to her apartment door and was tiredly looking for her keys in her purse. Lena turned around because she felt tired without thinking about it. She frowned when she saw that it was the last person she expected to see in front of her flat, with the ugliest scowl on his face. Lena thought he had seen her with Damien because he looked like he was about to kill someone. She had seen enough of Kellen's behavior to come to that one conclusion, so it wasn't hard for her to guess that he was probably calling her a lot of names in his head. It was clear that his dirty ideas had taken over his head again. And that made Lena take a step back because she didn't want to be what Kellen had become. She wouldn't listen to any more of his stupid complaints. Nor now, nor ever again. "What brought you here?" she said, not bothering to hide her annoyance. Kellen gritted his teeth. He pulled his lips together into a narrow line. "I didn't know that only Damien could come here. Does Ryan come by, too?" The dirty sign made her stomach flip. It was horrible that this man, who had previously said he loved her with all his heart, should think such horrible things about her. "No," she was able to say calmly. "These days, it's only Damien because he cares about me so much, and I really enjoy being with him. Just like you enjoy being with Selene." The insinuation worked as planned. Kellen's face got angrier if it was possible. "Selene and I are serious. We're getting married soon." This news was becoming very old. "Who said Damien and I aren't serious?" Lena said, tilting her head to the side. She was happy to see Kellen's anger slowly fade as what she had said sank into his foolish brain. If it's going to burn no matter what, then adding some petrol shouldn't be that bad of a sin. "I'd rather have one big explosion that ends it all than go through the horrible process of having my skin, flesh, and bones burn to ashes." His shoulders became tight, and it seemed like he had stopped breathing. He felt furious, angry, and scared, but the pain in his eyes was so great that it drowned out all of those other feelings. It took her by surprise, and she wanted to take what his eyes were saying without saying a word and turn it into words that she wanted to hear. Instead, she turned away. Listening to her heart would be a bad idea. Kellen replied in a chilly, scary voice, "At last, that illegitimate child of yours will get a name, hey?" To illustrate his point. It was funny how he always went over that line and got to the point where it hurt the most. She was shocked by what he said. It hurt like a slap. The pain was, in some ways, worse than any physical attack could possibly cause. Lena was so tired that she didn't even flinch. It was a scary, burned-out condition. "Heart, if the only reason you came here is to annoy me with your stupid gibbering, then know that I don't have time for it." Lena groaned and turned to the side a bit to open the door. "I'm here to give you these." Lena stared back at his outstretched hand, which had 2 envelopes in it that had come from inside his coat. Lena received the envelopes with considerable reluctance, giving them a dubious glance. Kellen responded, "It's the invitation card for Selene and my engagement party next week. Sign the other one as soon as you can. It's the divorce papers." Lena stood there frozen. Kellen stormed out without looking back. A tear that didn't listen dropped and soaked into one of the envelopes. She looked blankly at the moist circle the warm liquid made for a bit before ultimately going into her flat and shutting the door behind her. She walked slowly to her bed. She was so tired that she felt it all over her body. She couldn't say if the pain in her stomach was because of her first chemotherapy session or because her marriage was already over. That night, she lay down with the envelopes in her hands. She was so tired that she had no choice but to give in to it, even though she knew that tears were streaming down her face and the pillow was wet and chilly. "It seemed like I was standing in the midst of a crossroad, where the stories say evil lives." Kellen seemed to be waiting there to give his soul to the devil. Lena's bold suggestion that night that she could really be serious about that bloody Damien had already gotten lodged in Kellen's throat like a painful spike that wouldn't go away or let him forget about it. Hitting the gym was just as pointless as yelling at his colleagues who didn't know what they were doing. Whiskey couldn't even burn his throat enough to ease the pain in his chest. And then there was that stupid engagement party that was coming up soon. When he accidentally answered Selene's call, she wouldn't stop calling him to ask why he hadn't answered her calls. This made him want to hit someone in the face. He would have told Selene to go away if it weren't for his business. But that was clearly not conceivable. One night, when he was intoxicated, he couldn't remember anything, and that stupid debt to Isaac Arthur was the worst thing that ever happened to him. Was this going to be the rest of his life? Oh my God! It already felt like hell. And Kellen couldn't help but think of Lena. He never got tired of talking to her. Before Lena's true face was revealed, things were so different and easy. Kellen fastened the last button on his dress shirt in front of the mirror on the door of his wardrobe. The celebration night has finally come. He made sure that his face didn't show any of those dangerous feelings that were making him sick. He was in the middle of turning around when he accidentally smacked the empty vase with his knuckles while picking up the car keys from the side table. The vase fell to the floor before he could even move. The bits of broken glass were all over his shoe-covered feet. He suddenly felt uneasy in his stomach, almost like a warning. It seemed like something bad was waiting just around the bend. Lena stepped in front of the mirror and glanced at herself. The royal blue dress that came down to her knees fit her well. She didn't have any jewelry on, but her hair falling down her shoulders filled that space. She dressed for tonight in a way that was not at all suggestive, and that was exactly what she wanted. She groaned and turned away from her mirror. The grin on her lips didn't help the tiredness in her eyes. The throwing up, tiredness, and feeling like she couldn't breathe were making her days worse. It was clear that her health was becoming worse, and the adverse effects of chemotherapy were showing up faster than she had thought they would. She had to eat bland food because her stomach wasn't working right, but it looked like she was refusing it, too. On top of everything else, it was getting more and harder for her to control her bad feelings. Since Kellen gave her the divorce papers and the invitation to his engagement party, she had been wondering non-stop how it was possible to move on from someone so quickly. She wanted to know that secret for herself because it was evident that she was still stuck where she had damaged herself. Lena picked up her purse and then paused for a bit before eventually signing the divorce papers. She realized that it would only be right to present these documents to Kellen on the same night that he took a step toward a future with the lady he had chosen, just like he had given her the papers and the invitation at the same time. She also thought that a divorce would be the nicest gift she could give him. She left her room and walked by the green paintings on the wall. Damien had put them up a while ago and said that green was excellent for health. Yes, they made her eyes feel better, but she didn't expect them to work a miracle while the malignant tumor was taking away her chances of living. Lena left the house thinking about the paintings she had left behind. But green is a miracle. It's a green miracle. There used to be a lot of green outside her parents' house. That was a long time ago. As she became older, green was no longer as important. It was strange how her thoughts seemed to be repeating themselves, getting mixed up like she was losing control of them very rapidly. She said it was just jitters and brushed any doubts aside. Selene's smile didn't leave her face as she whirled about in her floor-length party dress, which had a deep split at the side that teased her long, creamy leg. The fancy chandelier in her fancy hotel room even looked dimmer than the happiness that was coming off of her. She was so happy that nothing could stop her. And why would it? She was finally ready to legally claim Kellen as her own, and she was alone. Only she understood how far she had to go to see this day. She had even murdered to obtain Kellen. Not only did they lie, but they also plotted. She loved Kellen that much. She wanted him that badly. I can't wait to meet you, Kellen. The whole freaking world will see tonight, she said with a laugh. That you belong to me. Someone knocked on the door. Come in, Selene said in a happy voice as a hotel worker came in, said hello, and then departed with a glass of wine she had purchased earlier. A drink of greatness before she went out to get her boyfriend. But that taste made her pout a little. It seemed a little strange, like wine, but not quite. Selene took another drink, shrugged, and flung her head back to swallow it all in one go. At that point, her phone rang. It was Isaac Arthur, her wonderful father, who had made things happen so much faster. It turned out to be a great idea to blackmail Kellen a bit. Yes, Daddy, Selene sang as she picked up the phone. Ryan leaned against the wall outside the hotel room and gave some money to the staff, who looked impassive and then ran out without saying a thing. Ryan's lips curled up at the corners, making a nasty smile. This was the start of Selini's end. That woman was about to have the finest night of her life. Lena came into the big hall of the hotel where the celebration was happening through the big double doors. Memories hit her like a lightning bolt, and she had to stop for a moment. They were the recollections of the good times, the golden days of love and optimism she had with Kellen. She remembered a similar, fancy event that had announced her engagement to Kellen. There were happy people, bright lights, decorations, and food all throughout the hall. Everything had made this feeling of endless delight. It felt like a stinging pinprick inside because I knew that none of that happiness would stay long. And now she was here as a guest, to really set him free and see him promise the rest of his life to someone else. She craned her neck to try to find Kellen among the crowd. The idea was simple: find Kellen, congratulate him, remain for a bit, and then go and never come back. Kellen should be smart and tough enough not to show up in front of her again after tonight. But her quest stopped in the middle when she heard a voice she knew. "You." Lena turned around and saw Celeste Hart there in front of her. There had been a huge hole in her life since she lost both of her parents at the same time while she was in high school. As soon as Lena married Kellen, Celeste became like a mother to her. Celeste had told Lena to call her mom just as Kellen did, and since then, Celeste had given Lena the love a mother gives a daughter. Lena's eyes brightened when she saw the woman again after so long. If you suddenly saw the dear face and felt happy. If Lena hadn't been there, she could have taken a step back and thought about how time and circumstances can change things. "Mom," came out of her mouth freely and often. "Don't call me that," Celeste quickly said, appearing quite dissatisfied. "You lost the right to call me that the moment you turned against my son." Lena's eyes lost their glint of optimism and beautiful recollections. "You amaze me to no end," Celeste said as she shook her head. "You're showing how low you can go and how shameless you really are by coming here tonight to ruin everything for my son again now that he's finally moving on. I came here to give him the divorce papers, signed. He asked me to come." Lena said this through clenched teeth, unwilling to show any vulnerability as others around them started to turn their heads, thinking something interesting was going on. Celeste's eyes went wide with shock before her face got even more angry. "And you came here to cause more trouble? I know you've been trying to manipulate my son again since he got here to Felden. But I'm warning you, Lena, back off. We've already seen your true face behind that innocent mask you wear." Celeste lowered her voice a little and looked at the people around her. "And I'm glad to hear that you couldn't get away from the punishment your sins brought. I've heard you feel ashamed to be seen with that child of yours. But you should know that it's something you brought on yourself, no matter how embarrassing it is. Now go back to your child, Lena, and stop chasing after my Kellen." "Are you serious? So that's what many thought was the reason they never saw her with her child? It's no surprise that there were so many people who didn't like humans. People in society might be really cruel at times. I have to tell you, ma'am, that the rumors are as silly as you and your son's imaginations are," she said. Her eyes were full of angry tears, but she lifted her chin defiantly against the constant stream of insults and accusations. "And don't worry about what I should do. I know it's better to go back to my child than to live with people like you. She quickly pulled the divorce papers out of her handbag and put them into Celeste's hands, which were not expecting them. Please do me a favor and give this to Kellen. Tell him he's free. Lena rushed out of the hall without looking back, without even pausing to scowl at the people pointing at her as if they knew. As if they could now see who she was. As the woman who had done wrong, as the woman who had been rejected. Kellen shook his head and looked at the noise near the entrance of the hall for a second. It didn't seem like much. He could only see the tiny group of people gathering there plainly from where he was standing on the other side. It was like a usual party drama. The gentleman Kellen was talking to, who was also a businessman, said, "It must be a cat fight." Indeed. He scowled when he saw the time on his watch and realized that Selene was taking too long. He didn't want to hold his future wife in his arms, he just wanted to go away from all the people who either made him angry with their congratulations or made him want to kill them because they were so interested in his failed marriage. Isaac Arthur had already ruined his mood when he strolled in and praised Kellen for making the correct choice. Just when Kellen was thinking about sending someone to get Selene and get this drama over with, she stepped in more like tumbled in. The visitors moved back as Selene wobbled forward, like a sea splitting in two. Kellen was shocked when Selene smiled too much and finally saw him. She was intoxicated. Kellen saw the shocked looks on both his mother's and Isaac Arthur's faces out of the corner of his eye. Selene's eyes were half closed, and she had a Cheshire smile on her lips. She tripped over her own dress as she got to him and was ready to fall face first. He was lucky to catch her at the last minute, so she didn't kiss his feet or, even worse, throw up on them. He attempted to get her to stand up straight, but it didn't work. It was hard to keep someone who was so serious about not defying gravity up. "What is wrong with you?" Kellen said in a low voice. "Why are you drunk now?" he yelled at the conclusion. Selene started a little when he suddenly raised his voice, but when she glanced up at him, she smiled dreamily. "Bloody hell," Kellen said, closing his eyes for a second as his anger grew. "Stop acting like a fool." Selene's smile grew bigger, and her eyes were now shiny with alcohol. She laughed like she had heard the best joke when she said, "Fool." "No, sweetheart, I'm not a fool, but you are. In fact, you're the biggest fool I've ever seen," she mumbled. "That makes me love you even more, you know." She leaned in to kiss him, but Kellen stopped her by holding her shoulders. He was convinced that the visitors were having a great time with the drama. "Shut up." "But Kellen," she moaned. "Your silly drama is getting on my nerves, she's only telling the truth, Kellen," a loud voice said, cutting him short. People turned their heads to see where the sound came from. Isaac Arthur, who was on his way to help with the problem, stopped dead in his tracks. Selene was busy sulking at Kellen, but as she saw the man walk out of the crowd, she screamed, "Ryan! Ryan!" Selene had yelled in a drunken way. Kellen followed her drooping eyes and saw Ryan emerging out of the mob of excited fans. Ryan strolled up to Kellen and Selene in a very calm way, with a slight smile on his lips. Ryan said again, "Selene is only telling the truth, Kellen." "The truth?" He pointed at Kellen and said, "You're the biggest fool of them all." A flash of anger broke through his generally calm attitude. Kellen was already quite angry with Selene's inebriated behavior, and now Ryan's abrupt arrival and snarky comments made him much angrier. His eyes became slits. "Why are you here? I don't remember inviting you to this party." But Ryan didn't seem to care what he said. Selene, on the other hand, wobbled while smiling at Kellen. He was having a hard time keeping her upright and not charging at the calm and smug face in front of him. Ryan rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, just stop your stupid rants for once, Hart." At that point, Kellen knew he had had enough. He let go of Selene, who was leaning against the pillar a few feet away and was too lazy to get up. Then he ran toward Ryan and grabbed him by the collar. "You have the nerve to come to my party without an invitation and talk." "No, not me. It's you," Ryan said as he violently yanked Kellen's hand away and walked a few steps away from him. "You've gone too far with everything. Get out of here, Ryan, or I'll have to call the guards," Kellen said, his voice quivering with anger. He couldn't believe he had to deal with both his inebriated fiancé and his wife's buddy at the same time. "That's crazy." Ryan clucked his tongue and said, "Oh, come on. I only came here to say congratulations. You don't have to be so rude." Ryan looked around at the confused expressions of visitors, Hart's friends and family, and business partners. Some were gazing at him, while others were scowling at him. "I'm here to congratulate this great business tycoon for avoiding bankruptcy by selling himself to Miss Arthur." Celeste, who was now next to Kellen, gasped when she heard what Ryan said. Kellen was ready to yell for the guards, but Celeste stopped him by putting a hand on his shoulder. "Kellen, what is he?" Kellen turned away, gritting his teeth and making Celeste seem sad. She must have known about that previous loan, and now that she had put two and two together, she found a consequence that didn't look good at all. "No, it can't be," she said, still shocked more than not believing. Ryan stopped for a second and said, "I'm only telling the truth, Mrs. Hart. Just like Lena did that night." Kellen said coldly, "Don't." He didn't want anyone to talk about that awful night again since it brought back too many emotions of treachery and pain. And he really didn't want Ryan to be the one to tell the story. "Why not?" Ryan asked with a laugh. "Throwing your wife out of your house and life when she was at her most vulnerable, based on some photos that can be changed, must have seemed like a noble thing to do. It must have seemed okay to you to deny the child she was carrying and insult it in the worst way possible. By the way, Hart, I hope you were smart enough to get something solid to back up your theory. Maybe a DNA test report." Ryan tilted his head and paused for a moment, pretending to be in great disarray. "Or maybe you didn't have any backup at all. Maybe what you really did was fail as a husband, a father, and a freaking human being." The whole hall was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Selene's quiet laugh in the background was the sole sound. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking about the whole speech. She was going to say what she thought about the things Ryan brought up, but Kellen's angry shout stopped her short. "It's sad that you're trying to make things better for Lena. Just shut up and leave." Kellen looked for the guards who should have been there by now, but he couldn't see any of them, even though he could hear the noise. It seemed strange that the security he had hired just for the gathering was not in sight. "What?" "Yes. Leave." Selene couldn't remain quiet any longer. There was no way an important talk was going to happen without her meddling in it. You, too, need to leave, Ryan, she said with a sneer. That peesh. Kellen sighed in exasperation and shoved his forefingers into the gap between his eyebrows. Isaac Arthur, who had been standing calmly next to Selene until now, clasped her elbow in a serious way. Selene tsked in disgust when he cut her off, though. No, Dad, let me talk. Shhh. She pulled her extremely pale-looking father aside and swayed a little. Let me tell them how hard I thought it would be, but look, she said, looking at Kellen with a triumphant expression in her eyes. She was drunk, and her face was dreamy with this obsessive love. Look how easily I got rid of her from Kellen's life. All I needed were a few altered photos made by a professional. Nothing more, she said with a laugh. Ah! I still remember how in love Ryan and Lino looked in those pictures. Oh, how in love they were. There were a lot of gasps. The harm had been done. Isaac Arthur closed his eyes in disappointment. Ryan was the only one who grinned. His mouth curved up into a smile that was full of anger, revenge, and deep sadness. Kellen was speechless. It felt like an electric wire was hitting him. As Selene's words slowly sank in, his heart stopped pounding. Photos that have been changed. The images of Ryan and Lino have been changed. Celeste lurched back and fell onto a chair. She sat there frozen, holding on to the reality that had been revealed. Fools! Selene was laughing so hard that she couldn't stop talking about her heartache, not realizing how much trouble she had just caused. All of them are bloody fools. It was a rough pull-off of a blindfold of hate and mistrust. Waking up to find that everything around me had been wrecked while I slept was the worst way to wake up. Kellen was in the thick of that mess. He remained there like a statue, thinking over and over every loud syllable that Selene had said. Of course, Selene, Ryan said with a chuckle. And since you've told them so much about your good deeds, why don't you also tell them exactly how Lena was hit by a car that night? Let them know how well you planned the whole thing. Isaac Arthur said defensively, my daughter is drunk and clearly not making any sense, as Selene tried to respond joyfully again. You won't be able to prove anything based on what she says now. Oh, but sadly, I've gathered enough witnesses and seized the men your darling daughter hired to do her dirty work. It took me some time, but I can finally say that I'll be nicely proving everything that she'd done with my Lena, Ryan said indignantly. Actually, the police would be there any second now. Kellen couldn't blink or move a muscle, even as Isaac Arthur ran at Ryan, who effortlessly pushed him away with a powerful fist. After that, Isaac stayed on the floor in the same position he was in before. Kellen saw everything, even though he felt like a crippled entity. The reality hit him so hard that he didn't know how to get over it anymore. It was like a thunderbolt. Memories of that dark night came flooding back, and he instantly saw them in a new way. It was as if a mirror had suddenly appeared in front of him, and he could see a cruel image that was no one else's but his own. Lena was correct. He said she was cheating on him, but he was the one who cheated on her. He really had been a great. He felt sick to his stomach when he thought about how he had believed those stupid manipulated photographs more than the lady he loved, so he had tossed them at her face. Don't you dare say my name with that dirty mouth of yours, I hate you, Lena. You make me sick. Tell me, how long has this been going on? Ryan was at my house last week, right? Were you in our bed too? Tell me. He felt bad about the things he had spoken to her that were still ringing in his ears. He saw all of the memories of her sad eyes, tear-stained face, desperate pleas, and the way he had pushed her away so roughly, insulted her, and made her feel bad in ways that made him feel so ashamed to even think about them now. They all blended together into a distressing limbo. He was left with a lot of self-hatred and revulsion. And to think that it hadn't finished that night. The back of his eyelids hurt when he remembered how he had never stopped insulting Lena, even when he saw her again. He shut his eyes tightly, and behind them, he saw Lena's bloodied body lying on the street after being hit by the automobile. A tear fell from his eye, and another one followed. But the warm liquid of pain and regret wasn't enough to wash away the huge amount of guilt that was stuck in his chest. He was heartbroken thinking about what Lena had to go through, and he was scared that nothing he did would be able to fix the damage. Kellen abruptly opened his eyes and stared at Selene with a deadly cold look. She continued mumbling stuff that didn't make sense while falling back against the post again. He rushed toward her and grasped her shoulders with such force that they hurt before he could even think. Selene was so stunned that she couldn't even scream when he shook her hard. Her head bounced as she gulped for air and turned pale from all the abrupt motions. Why? Why did you? Kellen stammered, his eyes clouded with tears of fury and remorse. How could you? Selene didn't seem able to answer the questions Kellen could barely ask. Kellen finally let her go and took a step back, breathing hard. He made a fist and hit the pillar next to Selene's head with a loud shout. Selene fell down the pillar because she was scared. What is the point of now punching into that clueless pillar, Kellen? Ryan's voice, even while it was mocking, had a hint of anger in it. Or terrifying that witch, he said with his eyes, pointing to Selene, who was slumped on the floor. Shouldn't you punch yourself in the face instead? For making Lena go through such hell? For dishonoring her? Ryan said. Because you killed your own child. Kellen's head shot up to look at Ryan, and the knuckles that were still pressed on the pillar relaxed. He couldn't believe what he was seeing and was horrified. His hands became numb on both sides. The last piece of news about this catastrophe felt like a sharp knife cutting through his flesh. Ryan nodded, his lips pushed together and his eyes flaming hot. That night she lost her child, she would have died too if Damien hadn't found her. It's ironic that a stranger saved her when her own husband didn't care if she was alive or dead. I guess it's too soon then. 9 months have to pass. The father Ryan had been in touch, right? I saw him here in Felden, too. By the way, is he willingly sharing you with Damien? Or are you cheating on that poor guy, too? Or maybe you've grown tired of him, and Damien is your new toy. I heard you've been living in Damien's apartment for a while. Is he good in bed? The echo of his own voice hurt him deeply. In a meaningful way, they came back to haunt him. Get that bastard thing out of me. Everything around Kellen seemed to spin, and he almost fell to his knees right then and there. He wanted to kill himself and end his life, but it was clear that even that wouldn't bring back what he had wrecked with his own bloody hands. The sin he had done could not be undone. How had he turned into this monster and done the unspeakable to the woman he loved? What had he done? Ryan was correct. Selene had only won because he had let her. He had damaged everything out of envy and rage, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't go back in time. He could never bring their child back or fix Lena's wounded heart. He was the one who caused this tragedy, and he would be damned to burn in it forever. Lena walked into her flat and locked the door behind her. Since she rushed out of the party, she had been crying non-stop. Even the cab driver had given her worried looks while driving. The quiet cries grew into muted whimpers as the sense of being completely broken engulfed her from all sides. She had worked so hard to create a strong fortress, but now it was falling apart. Her confidence in fate was as weak as the castle. As her tears grew louder and her breathing became more and more difficult, she clenched her hands at her sides. The dull aching in her head that had been there all day had slowly changed into the type of agony that felt like a constant, furious stabbing. She groaned and gripped her head, remembering what the doctor had told her to do if something like this happened: contact the hospital emergency room right away. But at that time, she didn't want to do anything to make the anguish go away. This bodily pain helped dull the sharp pain in her heart. Lena felt really shattered today, so damaged that she knew she would probably never be able to fix herself again. She searched her heart for a cause to beat but couldn't find one. She also looked for at least one tiny glimmer of hope to grasp onto but couldn't find any. She had lost all hope of starting again and keeping her commitment to herself to forget the past and move on. The darkness that was coming eventually wrapped around her like a lot of dirt around a body. She started to cough violently after taking a difficult breath. The old bitter taste of blood came back to the roof of her tongue and swiftly went down her throat, where she spit up part of the warm crimson liquid. As she inhaled again, blood flowed from her nose as well. She wiped the blood off with her shaking fingers, brought them up to her eyes, and watched with fuzzy vision as one life faded away. She took faltering steps toward her bedroom, but halfway there, it felt like everything around her was spinning out of control. She leaned against the wall next to her and walked forward, leaning onto the wall for support and leaving a trail of blood behind her. But her trip was cut short as her hands hit the first set of paintings, the green ones that Damien had put there. When the glass frames broke into hundreds of pieces, they fell to the floor with a huge bang. After her greens broke, she fell to the ground as well. The many shattered pieces of glass hurt her flesh all over. She could feel the warmth leaving her slowly, maybe for minutes or hours, until the cold that made her head hurt more than the ache in her brain took over. She heard her phone ring, blinked her blurry eyes, and her whirling vision centered on the phone that was nearby. If she reached out a bit, she could hold it, and aid would arrive. Whoever was phoning would know she wasn't feeling well. Her fingers twitched as they started to go for the phone, but suddenly they stopped. "I can't stand looking at your face anymore. You make me sick, Lena, and all the memories I have of you and you. Now go back to your child, Lena, and pay attention to it instead of chasing after my Kellen." All the hurtful things others had said to her up to that point touched her skin with their frigid fingers. One by one and then all at once. Their quiet words were too tempting to ignore. A sweet smile of poisonous strength emerged on her lips. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to fall into a state of semi-consciousness, letting her empty hand lay still next to the phone, which was going crazy. The ringing in her ear got louder and louder, much louder than her phone's ringtone. A soul can only go through so much. She had reached her limit and was looking forward to finally putting an end to this sad story. The police came quickly with an arrest warrant. A female officer put handcuffs on Selene, who looked quite confused. Ryan was engaged in talking to one of the officers he knew personally about the cases he had filed against Selene. Kellen was so sad and sorry for himself that he didn't even see what was going on around him. He felt like the sky had split into pieces over his head, and there was nothing he could do about it. It was clear that he had already lost everything, but it was ridiculous that he just now comprehended and subsequently acknowledged it. And sadly, this now looked to be a bit too late. His own words and actions turned into lethal vines that soon wrapped around his neck and sucked the life out of him. Suddenly, he felt something inside him. He felt a peculiar type of emotion in his heart that was stronger than the remorse and sorrow he felt. It was a lot like when the vase broke into pieces near his feet before the party. He felt like something dreadful was about to happen, that what had occurred so far wasn't enough, and something was slipping away from him. He had beads of sweat on his forehead. "Lena," he exclaimed, suddenly finding his voice in an overwhelming need to get to her. Ryan, Celeste, the guests, the cops trying to calm down a very intoxicated Selene, and the paramedics working on Isaac Arthur were all in different kinds of frenzies in the background. Kellen couldn't see any of it. He ran down the corridor like he was in a dream and staggered out the doors. He could hear someone calling his name from far away, but he didn't care about anything else in the world. He jumped into his car and drove it out of the parking lot, making a fast and screaming slide. His eyelashes felt sticky as he blinked quickly to clear his foggy eyesight while he raced down the street at night like a bat out of hell. He was so eager to get out of the automobile that he almost fell face first when he saw Lena's flat. The elevator moved slowly, like a turtle creeping up, and he felt like a confined animal within the metal box. He rubbed the dried tears on his cheeks and dragged his quivering hands up to his messy hair, stopping himself from hitting the buttons with his fist. But when the elevator finally got him to his destination, and he ran out, he was confronted by something he didn't anticipate. Lola was banging on Lena's door with a worried look on her face. When she saw Kellen, or more like the mess he was in, she took a double take. But soon, her fear won out over her amazement. And she hastily said something when he looked at her questioningly. "I've been calling her for a while now," she said, showing Lena's number still being called on her phone as she spoke. "She's not answering, and she's not even opening the door. I don't like this, especially when, in a haste, Kellen cut her off. Get out of the way." Kellen hit the door with his fist a couple of times while Lola retreated away. "Lena! Open the door!" But nothing happened, there was no sound of anything moving inside her apartment. All that could be heard was quiet. Kellen grimaced, and his stomach fell with fear. It didn't feel nice. Not at all. Kellen took a few steps back, then abruptly sprang forward and slammed his shoulder against the door. It broke beneath the attack, and he fell inside. Everything was really silent, and everything smelled like death. Kellen could hear his heart beating loudly in his throat. It took his eyes a while to get used to the faint light that was undoubtedly emanating from some place in the living room. He moved forward slowly, looking around. When he heard something crunch under his sneakers, he suddenly stopped. He looked down and saw fragments of broken glass from a picture frame that had fallen and broken on the floor. His eyes slowly followed the glasses until they stopped on something that made him feel sick with fear. His heart stopped pumping, and his feet felt like they were locked to the earth and wouldn't move. He had been scared before, like when he was a child and a stormy night thunder cracked down on a tree right next to his bedroom window while his father was dying. He had also been scared when his bike crashed into a careless car, and he thought he was going to die. There were a lot of people on the list, but none of them could make him feel as panicked as he did now. He stared in horror at Lena's still body lying among the broken glass fragments. It looked like hundreds of daggers were stabbing his heart at once. Her face looked pale, which was different from the red blood that was flowing from the corners of her lips. He felt sick when he saw the little pool of blood on the floor, along with the scarlet spots of blood that the broken glass shards had made as they pierced her flesh. He snapped out of his frozen condition when he heard Lola gasp in the background. He pushed his shaking feet toward Lena, breaking additional pieces of glass beneath his shoe along the way. His brows were twisted in pain. The noise made him feel terrible in every manner, and it was strange how much it sounded like how he felt inside at the time. Kellen knelt next to Lena, not caring that the glass was stabbing them. He carefully put her upper body on his lap. Lena, he said, tapping her cheeks softly with shaky fingers to get her to respond. Lena? Lena? Please open your eyes. Oh God, Lena! No, no, no! Don't! No! He shook her shoulders, begged, sobbed, and begged some more. His tears streamed from his cheeks and hit her forehead. But this time, she wouldn't listen or answer. She had closed her eyes for a long time, and now she had closed them for good. The tranquility in this darkness was worth a lot more than the violence among the living. It was almost difficult to bring back the soul that had finally found the road to freedom. He cried out like a crazy person, "What have I done to you, Lena? What have I done to us?" The paramedics had to actually fight Kellen off of Lena's lifeless body. And then Lola, who was swearing, threw a glass of water at his face to get him to calm down. Lola didn't know what Kellen's genuine connection to Lena was or what Lena's background was like. If not, the glass would have probably had acid in it instead of water. It was like a bad dream that was hard to see after that. He drove to the hospital after the ambulance. Lola offered to drive right away when she saw him shivering. He didn't say anything, but he agreed. He saw them take Lena away on a trolley with an oxygen mask over half of her face. Her hair was matted, and her skin was pale save for the places of her body that had blood drying on them. He saw red specks that hurt the back of his eyes. As nurses rushed to help Lena in the emergency room, a specific doctor showed up at a very fast pace, and Lola started chatting to him right away. Kellen was like a ghost in the background, filling out the documents, seeing the blue curtains close over Lena's bed, and listening to the doctor talk. "We need to do a CT and MRI scan to find out how the tumor in her brain is doing. It looks like the cancerous cells have spread much faster than we thought." Lola's voice sounded terrified as she said, "WH, what will happen now? We can only say for sure what we see in the scan results," the doctor said quickly. "The chemotherapy didn't work. It looks like we've gone past the point where the chemo drugs could have shrunk the tumor. Maybe surgery is the only option now," but only if the CT and MRI scan reports show that the procedure won't put any important part of her brain at risk, because that could lead to a coma, paralysis, or even death. A tumor in her brain. Cells that have cancer. Chemotherapy. Operation. Dead. It seemed like the world had stopped moving. Virulent words were left behind, floating in the air without gravity, and they kept circling Kellen. They did make sense, but they also didn't. No. It couldn't be. He must have heard wrong. But even a poor attempt at lame denial failed. He had been busy hating her and making her life miserable with his arrogance and pathetic self. All this while, she had been going through bloody cancer. Kellen froze at the desk, right across from where Lena was behind the curtains, and the nurse had to physically pull the paperwork out of his hands. He was so angry with himself and how unjust this whole thing was that his hands were clenched at his sides. It should have been him, not she. He should have had cancer, not her. Never her. Lena wasn't the sinner, he was. But it was her bleeding on that bed behind the curtains. She was barely breathing and holding on to a weak thread that connected her to life. Kellen bent down, feeling nauseous. His gut was tight, and he was breathing out hot blasts of air through his nostrils. He staggered to the bathroom and threw up all he had in his stomach. He continued throwing up, and tears streamed down his nose. It wasn't just because of the bodily pain, it was also because of the pain in his spirit. Kellen had been staring at the white wall for 2 long hours when he realized that he had ruined all the colors in his own life. Lena had come into his life like a beautiful rainbow in the sky after a lot of rain. He had turned a beautiful rainbow into dangerous darkness just because he was insecure. He threw away what the skies had given him in the most lively way. He didn't deserve her, yet she picked him and gave him her love. And what had he done to keep that love alive? His own soul condemned him all the time since he couldn't think of a single method to make up for his faults. No. No, what he did wasn't just a mistake. They were wrong. Not just once or twice. He had gone down that same path of distrust time and again until everything was completely and utterly damaged beyond repair. His child had perished, and now maybe Lena was also going away. Lola added, "I called Damien. He's not in the city right now, but he started back right away after hearing about Lena." She gave Kellen glances that were full of doubt. It had been like this since he started sobbing while holding Lena's motionless corpse in the flat. She couldn't be faulted because she still didn't know anything, and Kellen didn't want to tell her that he was Lena's husband yet. He was too embarrassed to say who he was out loud. They were Lena's pals, thus, they must have known about his terrible actions. Kellen merely nodded in response without saying anything. Lola's phone rang, so she moved away to answer it. She knew she shouldn't do that near the rooms where tests were being done that involved radiation and other things like that. Robert, the doctor from earlier, went out the door and looked around before stopping on Kellen. "Where's that girl who came with Lena?" Kellen sprang up to his feet with a heavy sensation of fear in his chest. "You can tell me." He paused, but he swallowed his humiliation because he needed to know how Lena was. "I'm Lena's husband." "Her husband?" Dr. Robert stared at Kellen with doubt as he adjusted his spectacles. "Where were you when she came to see me and then when she had her first chemo?" I thought another guy was her boyfriend or something because he was always taking care of her. Where was he? Kellen grinned with anger. He would have to live with this guilt until he died. Anyway, Dr. Robert said with a brief sigh. Right away, Lena is going to the ICU. As I thought earlier, the scan reports show that the tumor has grown faster than we thought it would, so we don't have time to slow down the cancerous cell's growth with chemotherapy. He frowned and stopped before continuing again. But what puzzles me the most is that this decline in her health has been a slow process, and it's clear that she was sick the whole time. I told her after the first chemo that she needed to call the hospital right away if she felt so bad that it outweighed the side effects of chemotherapy. But she didn't, so it must have been a slowly growing headache that got so bad that she bled like that. Kellen's hands felt like ice, and his pulse raced as he listened to the doctor. He understood what the doctor was trying to say. It seemed like it was on purpose. It seemed like Lena had been through a lot of agony, kept bleeding, and still didn't contact the hospital or anybody else for aid. Her phone was immediately next to her dead corpse, and it was covered in blood. It had to be on purpose. And he had pushed her that far. He had pushed her to the edge, and now she had jumped off the cliff. We need to do surgery right away because Lena is in a bad way right now. Kellen let out a trembling sigh of pain and spoke out, his voice sounding like a croak. Will she be okay after the operation? At that point, he could go down on his knees and beg the doctor or anybody else if it meant saving Lena's life. We'll take out as much of the cancerous tissue as we can to keep her condition stable for now. Dr. Robert looked at Kellen with pity but still spoke in a professional way. But surgeries often go wrong, and it's a 50-50 situation when it comes to dealing with grade 3 malignant brain tumors. I'm not saying you should give up hope, but you should be ready for the worst. Was the doctor saying that Lena may really die during the surgery? And she would die anyhow if there was no operation. We're running out of time, so I need you to sign some papers so we can start the procedure as soon as possible. Running out of time. Kellen had never felt so powerless before. He hated feeling like he was disabled because he always wanted to be in charge. Lola, who had been back for a while and was patiently listening to the doctor's decision, was now crying and resting against the wall. Ryan was running down the hall toward them with a thundering look on his face, and Celeste was running right behind him. Kellen was so sad that he couldn't pay attention to anything or anybody around him. He fell back down onto the plastic chair behind him as the doctor left, stating he would mail the forms. A group of nurses quickly rolled a stretcher with Lena on it out the door. In a flash, they were gone from his sight. Kellen sat still, not knowing that others were staring at him. He could hear voices chanting things he couldn't understand. At one point, he flinched at the sound of distant cries. He stared at his hands. There was blood on them, Lena's blood. His hands shook, and a chill of fear raced down his spine. He wiped his palms hard on the edge of his shirt to attempt to get rid of all the blood, but it had dried by then and wouldn't come off. He tried, but it didn't work. Kellen looked like his whole life had been taken out of him as he stared at his hands. He looked like a statue that had been frozen in time, beautifully made but full of sadness. But the tears that were streaming down his face conveyed a different story. Third-person point of view. Ryan leaned against the wall and looked away from Kellen, who was a horrible sight. He didn't even look at the man for a second. If it were possible, he would have murdered Kellen with his bare hands in the worst way conceivable at the start. Kellen should have gotten the worst punishment in the world. But now was not the time to ponder about this sad individual, it wasn't worth it. Because Lena was locked in the struggle for survival within the OT, this was more important. And for the security not to kick him out of the hospital at this important time. The glass doors to the theater were scary yet promising at the same time. Doctors, nurses, and many more patients were always going in and out of them. Ryan's gaze followed everyone and then strayed to what could be seen of the interior through the glass. He had been praying in quiet for the previous 3 hours. Celeste's heart was breaking with remorse. If her son had made a mistake, she did everything she could to make matters worse. Kellen's doubts had started the destruction, and she had added even more poison to it. Celeste maintained her hand on Kellen's shoulder, but he didn't move. Her heart grieved when she saw her son like that, and it cried in regret for not trusting the girl she had previously thought of as a daughter. What type of mom was she? Where was she when her kid really needed her? She had to leave that innocent person behind because she was too obstinate to see. Kellen blinked once, and a few tears fell from his eyes. He didn't try to brush them away. He gently pushed Celeste's hand away from his shoulder while keeping his hand on hers. He didn't glance up at his mother since he thought he didn't deserve any love or comfort. He should have been roasted in the fire he made himself since he was a monster. It was another hour. And then, all of a sudden, Dr. Robert was coming out. Ryan stood up straight and hurried up to him. "Doctor." Kellen jerked out of his daze and got up right away when he saw that the doctor had come out. He was pushed by Ryan, who seemed quite angry about it, and stood in front of the doctor. "Doctor, how's Lena? Please tell me she's okay," Kellen said in a voice full of fear. Ryan had also stepped up to stand next to Kellen, waiting with bated breath. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Kellen said, his voice shaking with terror as the doctor kept quiet as if he were looking for the right words. Lena's okay, right?" he mumbled. He was too nervous to ask about Lena since he was afraid of hearing anything that would end everything. What if he never saw Lena again? What if he never got to hear her speak? What if? No. He didn't want to worry about the what-ifs anymore. Ryan turned his face away in disgust. It was disgusting to see Lena's so-called criminal husband behave like he cared about her. But things were quite bad, and Ryan held back his need to punch out this difficult man. But then he saw Lola, who was gazing at both Ryan and Kellen in complete perplexity, even though she seemed like she was worried about everything. Someone still didn't know. "It's been a very important surgery," Dr. Robert said, frowning. "We took out as much of the cancerous tissue as we could, but at some point, we couldn't go any further because normal brain tissue was getting in the way. And, we lost her pulse for almost a minute, but thankfully, we were able to bring her back to life." As the doctor told Kellen more and more, his face turned pale, and every cell in his body went numb. The doctor said after a short pause, "The next 7 hours will be very important for her. If she doesn't wake up by then." His lips became a straight, grim line. "Then I'm sorry to say that she might never wake up again. She'll go into a coma." "Don't wake up again. Go into a coma." Kellen lost it when the words sank into his head. He became angry and walked forward. How dare you say that? You were supposed to fix her. His eyes were red, and it seemed like he had fully lost his mind by now. The sound of Celeste and Lola crying next to him only made the firestorm in his imagination worse. The doctor only raised an eyebrow and stayed quiet. It was clear that he had seen family lose it when they heard bad news before. But Ryan was a different story. It was no longer feasible for him to keep putting up with this annoying condition. He pushed Kellen away from the doctor and lifted his hand to hit him hard in the face. But at the last minute, he pulled back. He looked at Kellen's face for a long time and noticed that his eyes were full of shame, regret, agony, and dread. The man seemed like he wouldn't be able to stand up straight for long. Ryan grunted and put a hand in his hair. What could be worse than this? Kellen leaned back against the wall behind him and put his hands over his face. He seemed like he was trying to hide from his own gaze. Yes, that was a childish thing to do, but he didn't know what else to do. Kellen looked out the glass window in the waiting room before the ICU. Celeste had departed and will be back in a few hours. Her trembling goodbye words were not heard. Ryan had walked off a while ago, complaining about the cafeteria's direction. It was easy to surmise why he was upset. The hospital had given them files to fill out, and Kellen had signed all of them when they came with Lena. He had even put his name as the husband on the consent papers for the procedure. Kellen might now be a permanent scarecrow in front of the ICU window, and it would be very hard to get rid of him. The nurse had thankfully told everyone they couldn't go inside Lena's room, otherwise, some individuals would have had a lot of violent outbursts. Lola gasped and then snarled, "Your husband," when she finally understood. And then she said that Kellen had to go, and the protest became futile when the police got involved. It seems that the authorities didn't want to hear about the history but simply the signals in the forms. After that, Lola marched out with her phone stuck to her ear. Kellen thought that Damien was being told about how things were becoming worse. Kellen let out a sigh. He was glad he could stay here, near to Lena, while he waited for her to wake up. He didn't know what he would have done otherwise. He knew he didn't belong here, but he had forced that humiliated part of himself to keep silent. He couldn't go anywhere till Lena woke up. If it meant he had to put up with insults from some devoted friends and be told every other minute how unimportant he was on this planet, then so be it. Anyway, everything of that was true. "I know," he mumbled, looking up at the dark sky. He prayed that morning would burst through the darkness soon and bring back his light. "I know I shouldn't be standing in front of you and asking questions. But I have to ask you questions." Kellen wondered if he was becoming crazy for having a discussion like this. But at that moment, he would have rather gone crazy than see Lena slide away in front of him. "Is it my fault? I'm the monster here. Then why are you punishing her? To this extent?" He quickly glanced across at Lena, who was sleeping soundly on the white sheets with her head wrapped in white bandages and an oxygen mask over her face. She looked very weak. It broke my heart to see her hooked up to so many pieces of equipment that showed she was alive but also showed how much she wanted to die. Kellen used the sleeves of his shirt to wipe the tears from his cheeks. No. In fact, he was the one who was punished here. God was really punishing him by trying to take Lena away in a way that he would never be able to get to her again. "Please don't do this. Don't take her," he said in a voice that was much lower than a whisper. "Please, I'm begging you. Anything but this." It was like a dream where everything that happened around you was out of your control. Lena felt like she was floating. Her whole body felt both light and heavy at the same moment. There was no more agony or misery, only quick flashes of old events from the past that rushed by her in a whirlwind as she hung there, what seemed to be in the middle of an infinite pit. There were beeping sounds coming from far away. They reverberated till they turned into a never-ending ringing sound. She heard hurried voices, some of which sounded familiar and some that didn't. People all around her were talking worriedly and, at times, angrily, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't figure out what they were saying or where it was coming from. It was hard to understand, and it was quite aggravating when the brief flashes of persons and things, the annoying ringing tone, and the rushing voices yelling things that didn't make sense all mixed together. She had exhaled in relief when, all of a sudden, everything went quiet. The flashing lights, ringing sounds, and persistent voices faded away as a chill that made her feel numb spread across her body. A cool air that made him feel uneasy blew over Kellen, and he opened his eyes with a start. He didn't know when he had fallen asleep with his head on the cool glass of the window. He couldn't put into words the type of terror that crawled up his spine. It completely took over him and his heart beat in a crazy way inside his chest. He instinctively turned his head toward the glass that Lena was behind. That was when it all started. Lena's body started trembling in spasms at the same moment as alarms went off. The equipment connected to her also started making a lot of noise. He couldn't breathe and felt like his feet were made of lead. A lot of nurses and physicians rushed in. They started working on her right away. Kellen didn't know that when he proceeded with shaky feet toward the open doors, a male nurse pushed him, but the push didn't bother him. His biggest dread was coming true. He stopped still at the door as he heard the few words that reached his ears. "Her pulse has dropped. We're losing her." There, in that frigid, quiet condition of being stuck. The empty space surrounding her was filled with funny light. And it became brighter and brighter until it was so dazzling that it hurt to look at it. She would have closed her eyes if she could, but as in dreams, she had to keep staring and waiting for something she didn't know. She saw two faces in the distance, and her heart raced with delight when she recognized them. Mom. Dad. She felt comfortable and at ease in a way that only parents can give. After a long time, her heart was full of joy, and her lips turned into a real grin. Kellen had moved a little closer in the middle of all the nurses' work. He could see her face as he looked over the doctor's shoulder. He saw that her lips had extended into a little smile of happiness. He had once loved her grin, but later, he had ruined it. He would die to see her grin again, but right now, seeing it made him feel uneasy. She was going away from him. When she saw her parents waving at her and telling her to come to them, she started to slowly walk toward them, almost as if she were floating in the breeze. She couldn't help but be pulled in, it was like a spell. Her mother raised her hand for her to clasp, and her eyes filled with tears of joy. For the first time in a long time, she felt loved. She wanted to hug her parents and tell them how much she missed them. She wanted to tell her mother how much she missed her lullabies during the hard days she spent alone. Like a kid, she wanted to hold her father's index finger and go away to a place where everything was fine. As she started to run now, memories of happy times from her youth flooded her mind. Her mother sang to her, she had birthday parties and the first day of school. Lena remembered that hide and seek was her favorite pastime. She used to feel like she had conquered the world as she jumped around the corner where her father liked to hide. She used to yell with joy. "I found you! We lost her!" Lola cried loudly from the door. Ryan appeared too shocked to do anything while Lola hugged him. Kellen blinked since the announcement shocked him. He looked at Lena's still body without blinking. The flat line on the heart monitor made him feel like the devil was laughing at him. He could feel arms pushing him back and attempting to get him out of there. Dr. Robert was next to the bed. He moved his wrist to check the time with a frown on his face. "Time of death, no!" Kellen yelled, and that's when he pulled aside the hands that were pulling him. "Lena can't die." "No." Dr. Robert turned to the younger doctor with the clipboard, ignoring all the cries but not without a compassionate gaze. Ryan and Lola had gotten closer by then, but they were both too sad to do anything about Kellen, who was still in denial. At first, Kellen got down on his knees next to the bed and begged her to wake up and open her eyes. But then his voice got angry when he didn't get an answer. And soon, he started to cry hard. "I swear," he said, his face pushed into Lena's hand as he cried. "I swear I'm going to kill myself, Lena. Please. You can't punish me like this, in any way, but not like this." "God, Lena," Ryan snorted from the foot of the bed, "she's gone, heart," and aggressively wiped away tears from his cheeks. He had this urge for revenge that was seething in his blood. "Why don't you go back and celebrate?" Kellen glanced up with shock. He shook his head in pain. He had done nothing except push her away from him all these days. And now that she had made the last step away from him, he was abruptly alone and sad, with a big hole in his heart where it used to be. He kissed Lena's icy hand tenderly after bringing it up to his lips. He kissed her, and tears mixed with it. He could hardly see her through the haze, and her soft hands caressed his shaking, wet lips. She was only a few steps away from them. As the faces became sharper, the overwhelming joy appeared to be a part of her. She could also see a little bundle in her mother's arms now. A little face came out from the beautiful ruffle of the clothes. For a while, it confused her, but then she felt the familiar pain of losing love. Her baby. "A few more steps, and then we'll be there." But suddenly, it felt like warm liquid was on her fingertips. She raised her hands out of curiosity. It appeared like drips of dew were falling down her hands. The quiet and peace were replaced by the familiar sounds of a woman's pain, one voice full of anger and another full of hopeless despair. Things started to change. The space surrounding her got so much bigger that she stopped feeling like she was flying, and her parents' and baby's beaming faces disappeared. She wanted to yell, "No, don't leave me again," but the anguish in her head made it impossible. A beeping sound started somewhere in a steady pattern. She wanted to throw a fit to make the unpleasant sounds stop, but instead, she opened her heavy eyes to see weeping faces and barely understood their shocked looks. But her gaze traveled past their faces and looked out the window of the room she was in. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the glass and touched her with their warmth. She could have awakened up to see the morning. And she knew she liked it more than rain. Oh my God! The patient had returned after 3 lengthy minutes of flatlining. Dr. Robert swayed back and forth on his heels, his hands on his hips and his mouth set in a tight line. He turned his face toward his junior doctor assistant, who had his eyebrows up to his hairline. That's what I call strange. Damien ran along the hospital hallway like a crazy person. The concern, fear, and rage that were building up inside him were so strong that they stopped him from being exhausted from driving for hours last night. Lola had brought him up to speed on everything that had happened since Lena went to the hospital, right up to Kellen's true face. He didn't get into a vehicle wreck on the way here, which was a miracle. But the speeding fines were a different story. He couldn't believe that Lena had kept Kellen's true identity as her husband a secret. And the best part was that she'd been working with that jerk the whole time without anybody else knowing. How much pain she had been in all this time. How awful it must have been for her to witness the jerk hanging about in front of her. Damien could only guess. And to think that he had her attend meetings with that Kellen. Damien cursed himself in his head, and then he swore out loud. There, the father of all problems was sitting in a chair. Damien was furious and upset, so he grabbed Kellen by the collar and dragged him up. He could see people gazing out of the corner of his eye, but before anybody could stop him, he hit Kellen in the face with a hard blow. Damien assumed it would leave a bruise, but it didn't make him feel any better. But Kellen was really quiet. It looked like someone had cut his throat with a dagger, and it wouldn't have mattered to him. And it made Damien even angrier. He was so angry that he wanted to fight. Damien snarled, "So you're the scoundrel," still holding Kellen's collar in his hands. "Do you have any idea how much she had to go through because she loved you? And to think that I didn't know this all along," he said, breathing heavily in anger, "I really want to kill you right now." Kellen sighed with discomfort. "Look, but he was cut off right away. And you have the guts to talk." Damien would have definitely gotten his wish to murder by starting with another round of fists, but someone stopped his rising fist. He turned his head quickly to find that it was a man his own age. The man said, "Leave him," with a grim expression, and then pointed to the security guys who were running by and looked quite unhappy. "Who are you?" Damien plainly didn't like being stopped, but he did anyway. "Ryan." Damien and Ryan were occupied chatting to each other, so Kellen went back toward the wall and slid down it. He was sitting on the floor with his legs out in front of him. Lena was still in the ICU, but she was now safe and slept again. He wanted to see her, but Dr. Robert had told all of Lena's guests that they couldn't even go to the ICU waiting room, given the trouble they had caused earlier. It looked like the doctor was disciplining them as they were school students, and he had even put a couple of big guards in front of Lena's room. Now, they were all crammed into the hallway next to the ICU. At least Ryan and Lola were stuck together, while Kellen got third-degree glares every other minute, and Damien was joined to that glare team. Kellen couldn't blame them, though. They had been there for Lena through thick and thin, even when he squandered time excavating a hole that could have been a grave. He might just as easily climb inside, lie down, and ask Lena's pals to cover him with dirt. He was sure they would be happy to help. As time went by, Kellen sat on the floor, waiting for Lena to wake up again. Another worry kept creeping into his head. The worry of having to see her again. Would she ever let him off the hook? Would she ever consider getting back together with him? The upsetting inquiries made his stomach drop since the responses that came back were quite bad. The scenario was rather strange. And too much testosterone. Lola peered at the boy sleeping in the hallway out of the corner of her eye. Kellen was using his pants to clean the dirt off the floor of the hospital. His clothing was so dirty that you couldn't tell what color they were anymore. There was just too much blood and grime everywhere. Even Dr. Robert gave him a look that screamed, "Zombies are real." Ryan and then Damien sat in the two chairs next to Kellen. Lola was the next person to sit on the chair, which finished the line of people in need. Lola let out a loud sigh that made the three men stare at her for a second. But then they went back to being the same robots they had been before. Strange. She was worried about Lena, too, but she didn't like staying quiet for so long. She turned to the side and opened her mouth to say something to Damien, but then she closed it quickly when she saw him glaring at the floor. She was going to go back to how she was before, but then she saw Ryan. And he was staring at her with a raised eyebrow. Lola hurriedly glanced aside after clearing her throat. Ryan made her anxious. He had previously told her what happened at Kellen's engagement party that went bad. She concluded that Ryan was a touch terrifying because he was so adept at formulating plans like that. She could still picture the first time they met. Oh, how badly he damaged her knuckles that day. She did hit him, but nevertheless. She sighed again, and it shook the ground. There was a lot of bad energy behind the faux calm face. Another fight was coming up soon. Lola didn't want to see that happen again. Kellen didn't even try to fight back when Damien tried to hit him. It was just as bad as Lena not calling for aid on purpose when she was bleeding to death in her apartment. These guys are all crazy. Thanks, I don't have a boyfriend, she said to herself. She jerked her head up as someone cleared their throat. Ryan lifted both of his eyebrows and gave her a look of disbelief. He must have heard her talking to herself and thought she was crazy. She snapped, "What am I supposed to do? You guys would rather kill each other than talk. So you decided to talk to yourself." Damien sat between them and dragged a hand down his face. Kellen moves his feet around while sitting on the floor. Yes. She lifted her chin. Lola didn't care what other people thought. She simply wanted Lena to be like that. She was going to train the girl who was lying half dead in the ICU to be just like that when she woke up. There is a limit to how long you can grieve over things that can't be altered. Ryan had a glimmer of a smirk on his lips as he said, "Are you always like this?" Lola squinted her eyes. He was laughing at her. A nurse immediately ran out of the ICU section and yelled for the doctor before she could say something really rude. Dr. Robert, his assistant, and a number of nurses quickly came racing. Everyone in line for their sadness got up. Lola tried to advance to see what was going on, but three frantic guys shoved her back and made it impossible for her to move further. "What?" Dr. Robert came out alone with a smile on his face and said, "She's awake." Lola felt like a big stone had been taken off her chest as she heard the news. She walked to the side just in time to see Kellen's relief countenance. Ryan and Damien also looked the same. But as soon as Dr. Robert left and told them they could meet Lena immediately, but only one at a time, the scenario altered. Ryan and Damien stopped Kellen from going inside just as he was about to. Hey, hey, hey! Where do you think you're going? Lola stopped herself from groaning. There they go again. Guys, excuse me, let the girl go by. But they didn't. Kellen shut his eyes for a second before letting out a sigh. Let me in. Ryan laughed. No way in hell. Lola tried again, this time stepping back and strolling around Kellen to see if she could get in from the other side. Guys, while you think about who can go in or not, let me just. At this moment, Kellen was in a lot of trouble. Hey, I need to talk to her. Not over my dead body, Damien said fiercely. Kellen looked annoyed and tried to push past the two men, but they pushed him back hard. Lola, on the other hand, practically fell on her as the boys locked their horns. Everyone back off, she suddenly yelled, striking Ryan's shoulder with her fist. She winced back, that guy was all lead. She was able to get the attention of all three males, thank goodness. She put her hands on her hips. Until each of you gets your act together, no one should go in that room, she said, pointing to the door. Over there, Lena just got away from the Grim Reaper, and you guys are fighting among yourselves. You should be ashamed of yourselves. She was happy to see them shift their weight and seem ashamed. Idiots! They were glad she didn't have her favorite knife with her just then. And you, she said, turning to Kellen. Don't you think you should come back later when Lena is more stable? She just woke up, for sake. Ryan complained. Later? He shouldn't even come back later. Lola now looked at Ryan with a scowl. How about we let Lena make that choice? Then, she pushed past them without being too kind. Mission Lena was waiting ahead. Lena's first thought when she woke up was how heavy her eyes felt. The light flowing in through the window was like it was getting past her closed eyes. Knowing that light existed and experiencing it were both very unpleasant. Her head hurt, but then someone fumbled with her arm, and soon, the pain turned into a numbness that she couldn't figure out. After several futile tries and a lot of groaning, she finally opened her eyes a little bit. A man with a sickeningly happy smile looked at her through a pair of unclear spectacles. She recognized the face. She slid her gaze slowly down to see the white jacket on his torso and the stethoscope around his neck. A physician. Oh. Dr. Robert. The guy questioned Lena slowly, as if she were a stupid kid. How are you feeling? Lena opened her lips to say something, but all that came out was a strange scream. Suddenly, a nurse came out of nowhere with a cup and put the straw from it to her lips. Dr. Robert rubbed his beardy jaw while she avidly drank from it. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.